Hello, hello, hello. All right, welcome back. Today is our second to last class. Can you believe it? You are just about done with 1L. Scary, I know, right? It is. You'll be graduating before you know it. It's scary. The 1Ls I had from COVID are now graduating, so it just flies by. But we're almost done. All right, so here's the game plan. If you notice, the readings today were fairly light, and that was deliberate. We'll cover the one case, okay? And then I will give you the rest of the class to do an exam, my old exam. It's going to be question 1 from 2021. On Tuesday, I will go over that exam in class, question 1 from 2021. So I implore you to take the time today to do this in the class where it's quiet and you have uninterrupted time. You'll have about an hour. You won't finish all of it. Finish it over the weekend or some other time. If you already did this exam, do another one. So I will finish about half an hour, give or take. I think we'll finish about half an hour today, and the rest of the class do it. Fair? All right. Second announcement. I'm looking for a research assistant for the summer. Don't all jump up at once, right? If you're interested, it's about 10 hours a week. That will involve blue booking, attention to detail is important, things of that nature. It's worthwhile. My RAs have always found it a good experience, and I hope one of you will do it. I'm not sure if I'm hiring 1 or 2, depending on what the school gives me a budget for. But if you're interested, in the next week or so, resume, transcript, and writing sample, unofficial resumes, unofficial transcripts, fine. Send it to me, and I will be grateful. Every year, I hire 1 or 2 people, and it's always very meaningful. Okay? Yes. Yeah, it's paid. I mean, not much. It's the federal work study rate, which they don't even know what it is now. No, it's basically minimum wage, not much more. You're not doing this for the money. It's not glamorous, right? You should do it for free, right? I mean, I'm not being facetious, but I volunteer for free all the time. So, yeah, Daniel. About 10 hours a week. And it's on your own time. You don't have to come to school. It's wherever you want. Free. Do you have research topics that you're working on? I don't know yet. I'm not trying to be difficult. It's whatever comes up. my mind, and that's when you do it. Right? It's yeah. There's some projects, but it's gonna be fun stuff. It'll be fun stuff. Is that a hand? No. No. Oh, okay, fine. No. Hell no. No. Yeah, maybe. Maybe. I mean, it might not be. I honestly, I don't know. Um, because I haven't decided yet. It's whatever I'm working on. That's what it'll be. Anyone else questions? And if you're curious more, you can just ask me a question before you apply. That's fine. Just if you're not sure, don't feel committed. But I like to make my decision before final start because once exam starts, people just sort of vanish and I don't see them again. So that's why I try to make it after the last day of class. All right. So again, we'll do today's topic. We'll wrap up. We're at a half hour or so in, and the rest of the class will be doing question 1 from 2021. All righty. Okay. So we're talking about landlord-tenant relations. In the prior class, we talked about when the tenant breaches. In one case, the tenant made repairs to her building, maybe was stripping copper, we don't quite know. In that case, the tenant failed a health inspection, right? In response, the landlord wanted to use self-help. Court said, no, you can't do this. You must use the eviction process. In the second case, the tenant also breached. He signed a 2-year lease. He never showed up. He never paid his rent. And then the landlord simply let the apartment sit empty for a year. Eventually, he rented it out. The court in New Jersey held there was a duty to mitigate. Again, don't just sit on your laurels. What you're sensing is in landlord-tenant law, it's very much a modern topic, and these sort of harsh common law rules are just sort of thrust aside. Today's topic's different. Today's what happens when the landlord screws up, when the landlord arguably breaches a lease. What then are the remedies of the tenant? Okay. All right. So I want to do a little background on security deposits. Now, I suspect everyone in this room has paid a security deposit at some point. Yes. I never get them back, or at least I didn't used to. I had a dog who had a bladder issue, so I never, ever got my security deposit back. Just it was painful. When I first came to Houston, I got an apartment by the medical center. They're like, no deposit. I'm like, oh wow, that's great. And I got a $2,000 carpet bill when I moved out. So they said, okay, we'll just bill you later for it. But the point of a security deposit is to hedge against a tenant doing something that they're not supposed to be doing, right? It's often 1 month rent. Why is it 1 month rent? Well, if the person doesn't pay their rent, you evict them, and then for that month it's empty, and then you go back the next month. If there's damages, you can take it out of the deposit. But the purpose of the deposit is not to enrich the landlord, right? In fact, when you give a landlord a security deposit, this is true, he's required to put it in a separate bank account. That's for your benefit only. It's called a trust account. Same way when you're lawyers and a client gives you what's called a retainer, which is money, you don't put that in your personal account. You put each client funds in a separate account and you withdraw from the account as needed. So if at the end of a lease there's a breach and they owe you however much rent, the landlord can take from that account and use to satisfy the debts. If there's damage to the carpet because your dog can't hold it in, right? They take it out of the account and put it to satisfy your debts. The trust accounts actually must earn interest. Do you know this? Right? You're supposed to be earning interest on your security deposit. Now it might be like almost nothing, like I'm talking like pennies, right, in the course of a year. But in theory, at least, it's trying to generate interest because it's your money being held. Landlords cannot just dip their hand into the deposit account and use it for their funds. No. You're not allowed to do that. That's very similar to attorneys, right? With an attorney, if your client gives you a $5,000 retainer, you can't use that to pay off your rent. You say, oh, I'll take the money, pay off my rent today, and put money back in later. No, you cannot touch that account. That's co-mingling. The quickest way to lose your law license is to commingle funds. I mean, slightly facetious, but if it's proven that you took money from a client, yeah, good luck. You're gonna lose your license, right? That's an easy one for the bar to just take your license away. You worked so hard, you went to law school, you studied for the bar, you got to class on time, right? And then they took your license. So don't do it. Yeah.
The money that's put into that separate account for retainer, the legal funds that aren't used, like I said, you go back to the client, right?
Yeah. So when you're a lawyer in the real world, right, and you get a client retainer, if at the end of the representation there's money left over, it returns to the client with interest. So it's actually a separate account. It's called the what's the acronym is IOLTA. I never remember what it stands for. It's interest on lawyer trust account, IOLTA, right? So there's actually money that's being generated from these trust accounts, and you go to a bank and you say, give me like, X numbered of account numbers, and you just slot one in with each your client. Daniel, then Tony?
What relationship technically a bailment is?
No, it's a trust. I mean, literally, you're a fiduciary. It's called a trust relationship, right? Tony?
What's the regulatory? I mean, so do they have people that are watching to make sure people don't?
Are we talking about landlords or attorneys?
Well, with either trust. So
I don't know who polices landlords. I'm sure there's some entity, but for attorneys, there's something called the bar, right? And it's not just an exam, right? The bar actually does disciplinary action. So, for example, if a client puts a complaint against you saying I had $5,000 in the trust account and I didn't get back, 2,000, that's a bar complaint. And then the bar can come in and ask for your records and say, I want to see your statements, what was put into the account, what was withdrawn from the account, and if it doesn't add up, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's possible to make a mistake, right? I've done this before. When you're on a bank account, you're transferring from one account to the other, right? You can make a mistake, right? But it's got to be a mistake. You can't just deliberately mix funds. All right. All right, good. Okay. Alrighty. So security deposits, a couple other limits. Usually 2 months is the limit, right? That is 2 months rent. It shouldn't be more than 2 months. And if the landlord wants to actually take money out of your deposit, they're required to give you an itemized list explaining why they took what they did. With mine, it was like $2,000 carpet. That was about the extent I got, but it was at least an itemization explaining why. It was a lot of, and I was so annoyed when we just moved in. They put down a brand new carpet. I was like, "Oh, this is going to cost me in a couple of years," and it did. Right? Give me an old apartment with a crappy carpet. That would have to replace it, but it was brand new carpet. They had to replace. My dog, she was lovely. She passed away a couple of years ago, but she just the bladder was never her strength. She was a great dog, but she was pretty good, but she never. Funny, I have a toddler now. Now that they pee on the floor, right? Which is why we have hardwood. We actually learned our lesson. Both children and dogs, they pee on floors. It's true. They do. Anyone have kids? They do. No. They don't run around. What? Okay, fine. TMI. Okay. There's always a conflict though with landlords. Landlords want to take more money out. Tenants don't. By the time you move out, you have little leverage, so most tenants just sort of take it. But in theory, at least you could sue and say, "Give me back my rent." No one's going to do it. You can, I guess. Okay. There's something called a rent acceleration clause. You want to hear about these? So I actually signed one of these ones in law school as an idiot. You think I know, but I didn't. I was a rising 3L. I signed a 1-year lease, and the way it works is this: if you miss a single payment of rent, the entire amount becomes due immediately, and you get kicked out. Right? You basically prepay for the 1 year of rent. I signed this. I don't know what I was thinking. I mean, I paid all my rent on time, so I didn't get kicked out. But if a person, I don't get why the landlord wanted this. I mean, I was a student, but if I miss 1 month of rent, I'm not going to be able to pay 11 months of rent at once. I mean, it's insane to even think of why a tenant. And I had like a credit check, and I had like a background check, and I had to be income verification. But on top of that, the landlord wanted an acceleration clause. I don't know why, but these are rare. Don't sign them. They're very risky. Because if you miss 1 month rent, they can collect the entire thing against you. Okay. These are very rare, though. What else do I want to talk about? That's it. Okay. Landlords' duties, right? So we've been talking about what are the duties of tenants. Tenants have to get permission for subleasing, permission for assignment. Tenants need permission for. Why is the chair over there? Who would sit like 3 inches from a student? This is just such a stupid. I can't. Anyway. Oh, someone actually did this that you know that. Never mind. I can't imagine why. Maybe there's no one there in that class, right? It's too close, right? Uh, tenants have many responsibilities, but landlords also have responsibilities, right? Um, many of these responsibilities are imposed by statute. For example, they must keep the premise in a safe condition. There has to be utilities, there has to be water, there has to be clean, sanitation, right? You can't let the apartment fall into disrepute. Not all landlords comply with those obligations. You have slumlords, a phrase which you may have heard before. Some properties are kept in dismal conditions, and in theory, at least, the tenants can file a complaint with the city or the county, wherever you are, and say that they're not complying with the housing laws. Um, other obligations in the lease, other obligations in the landlord are in the lease, right? For example, a duty to repair. If something breaks, whose responsibility is it to fix? There's a conflict though. If I'm in an apartment for 1 year, I don't want to take my own time and money to fix something if it's not my place, right? Why is it your problem? But the landlord's like, I don't care. If it's broken, whatever, just deal with it. So you have often this game of chicken where both parties, neither one wants to actually take the action. What if the tenant says, okay, I'll fix it out of my own pocket. I'll say it's $100 repair, but I'll withhold $100 for my rent. Can you do that? It's risky because the court might say, no, you cannot withhold that $100. You have to pay it, and you might get evicted over it. Or what if the tenant says, the state of the apartment is so bad, I'm going to just move out and stop paying rent? Can you do that? Well, that's the topic of our case today, but it's risky, right? It's very risky because if a court disagrees with you and finds there's not been an eviction, guess what? You're in the hook for rent and damages as well. So you always have this sort of game of chicken with eviction and moving out and withholding rent. And usually landlords have the upper hand, except when the tenant is the prosecutor's office. My goodness. Why would you do this to the prosecutor? They're the guys who go after criminals, right? I think this landlord wasn't the brightest, right? Of all the tenants you want to mess with, this is a group of lawyers, right, who frequently litigate in the state court system, right? Maybe it's a criminal division, right? I'm not sure, but this is a well-respected entity in the city. Okay. Now, before I go into the case, has anyone ever actually worked in a prosecutor's office or a sheriff's office, some sort of law enforcement office? Yeah. Do you ever deal with evidence? Ever deal with evidence? Yeah. Yeah. You had evidence there? No. Anyone else? Yeah. Oh yeah, you did. Yeah. Yeah. Tell us where you work. I know. That's yeah. Did you have a lot of exposure of evidence? Yeah. Evidence locker, chain of custody, very important stuff, right? What happens? Flip it, please.
Oh, my.
Yeah. Yeah. What happens if evidence is not properly stored?
Then it gets thrown out.
Can you admit it to court?
No.
Okay. So the reason why this case I think is so terrible is you actually had a building, a warehouse basically, where you were storing evidence that was committed in crimes, right? This is evidence for court. If the evidence gets damaged, destroyed, washed away, I mean, imagine if a box of papers gets wet, you can't read the paper, it's worthless. Not admissible in court. So let me tell you a story. This is a true story. It happened when I was clerking some years ago. This happened in Pennsylvania. A guy was using his basement to make crack. If you don't know what crack is, it's basically you take cocaine and you process it, you heat it up, and it makes into a different type of drug. Look, I don't know what you guys know, right? God willing, none of you know what crack is. That'd be actually excellent if you don't know what that is. But it's a drug. What was that? What's that?
I said like a pictorial demonstration.
Do you mean to demonstrate?
I'm
gonna get myself in trouble. Okay, I'm gonna stop. But anyway, this guy was making crack in his basement. And how do you make crack? In short, you heat up powder cocaine. You do other stuff to it, but you have to heat it up real hot. And one of the tools you use is Pyrex. You know what Pyrex is? It's basically this glass dish that you put in the oven and it heats up real hot and doesn't crack. Oh, crack, right. Sorry. Anyway, so the state police busted the state police busted this guy's crack warehouse, okay? And they seized all of his I'm gonna keep teaching my class, okay? And they seize all of his crack, and they seize all of his Pyrex and all of his dishes and all of his microwaves and his scales and his knives and different tools he used to make the drug. Okay. At some point, the case was handed over from the state police to the federal government because this guy had a lot of drugs and he was selling it all over the place. That's why it makes this federal offense. Okay. He's arrested. He's held in jail pending his charges. And I think he was in jail maybe 2 or 3 years. He'd been in jail waiting for a trial for a couple of years. Okay. Finally, this case comes up for trial. Right. Again, the guy was sitting in jail 3 years. He was looking at decades in prison. The amount of crack was insane. And this was before they adjusted the crack to powder disparity. He had a lot of time ahead of him. Okay. So the defense lawyer was up and he was cross-examining the detective who made the bust, who made the arrest. And the defense lawyer asked him, I'll never forget this question. It's like, detective, where are all the tools that were used to make the drugs, the dishes and stuff? And the detective said, well, we have a picture of it over here, exhibit whatever. And he's like, no. Where is the actual evidence, the actual dishes and plates? And this look comes to the detective, just silence. And he just gives a stare back. And he's like, where's the evidence? And at this point, the prosecutor, the assistant U.S. attorney says, oh, crap. So she knows something's up. She's laughing. You know what I'm going to say, right? So the prosecutor steps says, Your Honor, I need a recess. I got to go talk to my witness. Okay, so we take a brief recess. Okay. She talks to her guy. So here's what actually happened. It turned out when the case was transferred from the state prosecution to the federal prosecution, the state entity thought the case was over, and they destroyed the evidence. Destroyed all the evidence destroyed. All the Pyrex, all the drugs, everything. They destroyed everything. Yeah. Yeah, I see your mouth wide open. Yeah, they destroyed everything. So the lawyer's like, the prosecutor said, I need to call my boss in Pittsburgh, who was the U.S. attorney. He's like, I have to call my boss. Like, this is above my pay grade. So we asked for another recess for another hour or so. To her credit, the prosecutor is actually now a federal judge, really, really good prosecutor, walks back into court and she says, Your Honor, we're dropping all charges with prejudice. The guy walked out of jail that day. Walked out as a free man. Walked out. He'd been in jail for 3 years, waiting for trial. He walked out because no one told him that they destroyed the evidence. The detective knew it. Just walked out a free man. With and the amount of crack he sold was an obscene amount. We're talking a lot of drugs, and he just walked back home. Walked out a free man. I mean, he walked out. They can't keep you a minute longer at that point. They go, oh, well, we'll release you tomorrow. No, you walk out. That he walked out of court. So the reason why I tell you this story is the destruction of evidence is a big deal. Big deal. And it's not just evidence for trial. Let's say you're convicted and you have an appeal. And like 10 years later, the Supreme Court says, oh, yeah, you need a new trial. Guess what? All the evidence becomes relevant again. So even if they destroy the evidence after your trial's over, it's not over. You have to keep evidence basically forever. You can't get rid of this stuff, which is why this case annoys me that you have this evidence warehouse in this basement, and then you're like, oh, there's mold and there's water, sewage, all this stuff slushing around. This is people's liberty. I mean, this is literally a jail sentence that could be reversed one day because they don't have the damn evidence in stock. But anyway, so if you ever work in a police department or prosecutor's office, take good care of evidence. And one more story, then I'll move on, Tony. I promise in a second. When I was clerking, we had there was a case. You know what a shiv is? I don't know. A shiv is basically a homemade weapon in prison, right? You just make a weapon whatever you can, which is used to knife people. It's a sharp object, right? So one guy was working in a workshop with a soldering iron, and he took the extra bits of metal and he fashioned to basically a knife. This really long, jagged thing was sharp. And for whatever reason, it was in my office. I can't remember why, but it just stayed kind of as a paperweight in my office as a shiv. All right, now I'm done. Does that mess me? I'll shiv now. Tony, go ahead. Yeah. Someone asked me that earlier. I think you probably could have. I don't know what happened to him. Usually drug dealers don't like being in court, right? Because it's just they probably run away. It's like, thank God, right? So I have no idea what happened. I can't remember what the guy's name is. I could look it up. I have no idea. But he probably could have brought in an action against the police for failing to disclose the fact that they destroyed the damn evidence. And like he was like, oh, I have a picture of it. So I mean, he was ready for the question. Like, he knew what was coming next, and like the look on the prosecutor's face was like, oh my God. Like I could just see her face. She was dying. because she'd been litigating this case for like 2 or 3 years, ready for this trial. In cases never go to trial, they usually have a plea bargain. They usually plea out. So it was rare this guy actually went to. I think he was looking at so much jail time and so much criminal history. It didn't even matter if he was guilty. They do it for fun. I mean, I'm being facetious, but like when your sentence is so high and you have such a long criminal history, you're probably going away for the rest of your life anyway. So like roll the dice, right? It's not. A plea bargain is not going to give you that much more because he was. I think with the amount of drugs he had, he was never see the light of day ever again. We're talking about decades in prison, and I don't know how old he was, but I mean probably the rest of his adult life. So whether it's 25 years or 40 years, they're not going to care. Kevin, you're laughing.
Well, yeah, I kept on thinking of Fish Blood, but the people in custody was like, I just gotta wait, because at any time, there's a lot of times here, you go to jail, that they're getting state.
Yeah. Yeah, a guy he walked out a free man that day, which is just crazy. I mean, I don't know if his family's there. I can't remember, but I just walked out. Okay. And basically the judge says, okay, release him from custody. That's it. And he walks out. I don't go back to his basement, but he walked out. People did reoffend. I mean, I actually tangent, but I mean, there were people who were sentenced to prison while I was clerking, and I sort of keep a Google alert, who were sentenced a second time by the same judge a few years later when they're let out. So I mean, people reoffend. I'm sure he went back up in jail. Karma has a way of working, but I'm sure he got back to jail. All right, I'm done. All right, Marion. In the case, Village Commons versus Marion County. Marion County is where the city of Indianapolis is, the capital of Indiana. I don't know who am I up to. Bree, you're next. Facts, please.
So, yeah, we're in County, prosecutor about this rented,
Okay.
And, there wasn't any rent at the beginning, they started having problems, like, water.
Yeah, lots of problems. Just walk me through some of the chronology there. Just a rough timeline. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Did he? No, that doesn't fix leaks.
Like just a continuation of lots of leaks, damage to evidence.
Yeah, big problem, right?
Yeah, a lot of damage to evidence, broken pipes at some point.
Yeah.
Like, oh, it's okay, the mold issue.
Yeah, no big deal, right? Yeah, there's mold. People get really sick from that.
Yeah.
All right, Vicky, right? So Vicky, eventually, what did the landlord tell the tenant to do? Because all this water's flooding in and making a mess everywhere. What did he tell him to do? He made a request of the tenant. What did he ask? Tony?
Didn't he ask him to vacate or?
Well, he didn't ask him to vacate the entire property. What did he ask of him? What did the landlord ask the tenant to do?
I don't remember.
Rieger?
He asked him to move like the evidence out of the room that was susceptible to water damage, and
Good.
like 3/4 of the space was like, yeah, just move stuff out of there. It's gonna get damaged.
Okay, thank you. Very good. So when you have a lease, you are leasing a specific number of square feet, right? You're leasing specific property. Rieger, what did the landlord basically do here?
He constructively evicted them from that part of
Actually, more than constructive.
or effectively.
Well, I'll go to the difference between constructive and actual in a minute. But he told the tenant, you don't use X number of square feet, right? Now, Lloyd, that's a big sign, Lloyd. I like that. That's really good. I see that from across the room. That's good. I was a squint. Lloyd, help us out. What is the difference between actual eviction and constructive eviction?
Actual, when the tenant is portion of the premises, and then constructed, the landlord enters.
Okay, good. So let's just first get the distinction between actual eviction and constructive eviction. we've used this phrase constructive a lot, but constructive is like a legal doctrine where it's like almost not quite but close enough, like constructive service of process, constructive notice, and other types of constructive things. Right? With constructive eviction, the landlord deprives the tenant, here's the key phrase, of the beneficial enjoyment of the property. The landlord deprives the tenant of the beneficial enjoyment of the property. Lloyd, what does that mean, beneficial enjoyment? What's that mean? Book doesn't really say it, does it? No, it doesn't. So what do you think beneficial enjoyment means? Yeah, there's not a good definition, right? Let me define actual and I'll come back to constructive in a minute, right? Actual eviction is when the tenant is deprived of occupancy, right? The tenant's deprived of occupancy, right? What that usually means is there's a padlock, right? Or they change the locks on you. Think of the restaurant case from last class. When you're actually deprived entry, there's a lock on the door that you can't open. That's an actual eviction. When there's some action that's short of changing the locks, it might be constructive, right? I don't have a good definition for beneficial enjoyment. It's very open-ended, and it's very hard to prove a constructive eviction. Actual eviction is easy. You say, oh, they put a padlock on the door, right? Okay, that's easy, right? You can prove that with evidence. But what does constructive eviction mean? Now, why does it matter? With an actual eviction, if I put a padlock, let's say in the basement, that you can't go down there anymore, I can withhold rent, right? There's not going to be any debate. I can withhold rent, at least for that part of the property. But I don't have to move out for the rest of the property, right? If there's an actual eviction, they put a padlock on the basement, I can withhold some rent, but I don't need to move out for the rest of the property. But with constructive eviction, you got to move out. Or with a constructive eviction, you have to move out to withhold rent. If you stay there and keep paying the rent, you're presumed that you're okay with whatever limitation there is. So this is why the padlock is rare. It's very rare to have an actual eviction. It's much more common to have constructive eviction. Now, Anwar, this is a harder question. When the landlord told the tenant, yeah, don't use the basement. Don't use the basement. Go put your stuff somewhere else. Was that actual or constructive eviction?
It was, actual.
I think, well, the trial court found that, right? Did the appellate court agree? Did the appellate court really say?
I don't think so. It just
No.
meant kind of like he was constructively evicted in January.
Yeah, it wasn't clear. Right. So the appellate decision, I'm actually not a fan of. It says the trial court said this, and the trial court said this, right? And then it's like, we affirm. So it isn't clear to me. I'm not sure, I'd be just candid, right? And I think go either way. I don't know that telling them to not use a basement is actual eviction. I think I want a padlock, right? I think it's at least constructive, right? But does it matter? Does it matter in this case which one it is? Whether it's actual or constructive?
I wouldn't think so.
Why does it not matter?
Because either way, they're getting like their benefit.
What did they do after that statement was made? You have to move the evidence. What did the tenant do? What they moved out. So if you move out, are you allowed to withhold rent under either case?
Under constructive.
Under constructive eviction, if you move out, can you withhold rent?
Yes.
Under actual eviction, if you move out, can you withhold rent?
No.
Yes, the answer is yes to both. Under a constructive eviction, if you move out, you can withhold rent. Under actual eviction, if you move out, you can withhold rent. So because they moved out in January, it actually didn't matter what kind of eviction it was. It made no difference because they moved out. They can withhold rent. That's why I think the court didn't really bother explaining which was which because it didn't matter, right? The answer was they moved out, whether it's actual, constructive, or both. Maybe it's both, right? They can withhold rent. Yeah.
I thought the appellate court basically said it was both.
Yeah, maybe it's end, but if it's end, was it on the same date? Was the demand to move out of the basement both actual and constructive? I don't think it can be both. It's gonna be one or the other. Because If it's actual and it's not constructive, constructive means short of actual, right? So I don't see how the same statement can be both, which is why I'm so troubled by the majority. I mean, I think that's the right answer. The right answer is whether it was actual constructive, you can move out if there's rent. I'm sorry, if you move out, you can withhold rent.
There's actual, and 2 months later, there is constructive.
Well, but if there's actual, who cares about constructive, right? Now, what might happen is maybe it was actual eviction for the basement, but constructive eviction for the bathroom, right? I mean, maybe you can divvy it up like that, but the court doesn't get that precise. Yeah, Kevin.
Yeah, so, when I saw that, I thought the language, constructive was kind of similar to nuisance. That it's like a benefit.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I never thought of it that way.
Haven't actually trust that, but a nuisance, you cause something that would allow you to want to leave or whatnot. And then by staying there, you accepted a waive the nuisance. In this case, you would have waived the eviction.
By sticking around.
Right.
Yeah, that I haven't thought of that. That maybe constructive, this beneficial enjoyment language is comparable to the nuisance standard. That's what I thought. I haven't thought of it that way. Good idea. I learn something every day. I can count days in a calendar. I know what nuisance is now. I mean, I'm learning all these things from you guys. What else? Yeah.
So there really is no other beneficial enjoyment, like.
I'm sure there's a definition in some treatise, but the way I understand it is it's something less than official, something less than actual. That's how I would understand it. Yes.
Does the beneficial enjoyment have anything to do with the quiet enjoyment?
No. This is an important point. Quiet enjoyment refers to your legal title, right? That no one will come along and assert a superior claim. Because imagine, right? I sign a 1-year lease and I start my lease, and then Sarah comes in and says, oh, I have a 1-year lease for the apartment also. That would be quiet enjoyment. But beneficial enjoyment refers to physical criteria, or you would just write my line of sight. So again, the way I think of it is that actual eviction is when they're basically padlocking you. There's something depriving you of the ability to access it. I don't know if the statement you should move your stuff was enough, because you don't have to listen to them, right? You can keep it there. But I think it's enough for constructive eviction. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. Yeah, Clark.
I mean, if they kept it there, though, it would have gotten destroyed too, right?
Right. Which is why I think you have constructive eviction. You can move out anyway. I think the constructive eviction happened with the water. I don't think you even have to wait for the statement from the landlord, right? The fact that you rent the property to be a warehouse for evidence, and it's completely unsuitable for that purpose, I think you can claim constructive eviction on those grounds alone. They should have moved out earlier. Am I right? I can't believe they held on with their employees getting sick and all their evidence getting destroyed for so many months. Like, come on, like, you're the freaking government. Like, just say, I mean, have a police officer come by and knock on their door. I'm sure these people are the Hoosiers, right? They're very friendly. They waited too long. Yeah, Turo.
So let's say this was a breakdown, it's a big warehouse. Yeah,
Part of it. Part of it, yes.
Yeah, if you're partly, how would you discount it?
Yeah, no, now we're getting to details that are beyond the scope of what I want you to know, but I think you'd have to, right? I mean, if you're paying X dollars per square foot, you might offset the rent, but you run a risk if you offset too much or too little, you can be liable for damages. It's risky. I really don't know. I mean, it's possible that the government says we don't have the budget for this yet, but we're good for it. I mean, we don't know who made the concession for the 5 months of free rent. Maybe in the process of moving, they have to get appropriation from the city council. I mean, we just don't know. But I have no idea. It's possible. I mean, if you actually Google this building, the Victoria Center, it's a beautiful building in Indianapolis. It looks very nice from the outside. So it didn't look like it is a derelict place, but there might have just been some structural damage. And one thing just on water damage, there's no way for you to know there's water damage if it was a big rainstorm. I know this might sound obvious, but I moved into an apartment in Kentucky when I was clerking, and the day I moved in, the tropical storm came through. It was raining so hard, the water came through the windowsills, and I was freaking out. I was there for another year. Never again did it rain that hard, so there had no issues. Just was this weird freak storm. So water damage is something that you may not even know until it's too late. Right? You can do an inspection. It's hard to check. I mean, maybe someone can. I don't know, but I didn't know. Daniel.
Determining beneficial enjoyment, you have to look at purpose of the property.
Yeah, I think that does matter. I mean, usually when you're signing a lease, you're going to give some indication. Is it for commercial use? Is it for warehouse? I mean, you're giving some indication of how you're using it. I think that would factor into it, right? If this was, a medical facility, right, and you have like sewage dripping on top of people, I think that would be problematic. All right, questions? All right, there's one other point I want to stress on this case, on the Indianapolis case. The lease explained that the only remedies available were a suit for injunction, that is injunction to fix the leak, right, or a suit for damages. And the landlord said, well, you agreed to this lease. The only remedy we can obtain is an injunction for damages. You can't move out and withhold rent. And what the court basically said was, well, that's nice, but the state law requires you to, under state law, there's an eviction, so the lease doesn't really matter, right? Under state law, if there's a constructive eviction, there's no obligation to pay rent anymore. So even though the lease says you must pay rent, state law will always trump the lease. This is kind of the public policy, right? If you have a lease or a contract that conflicts with state law or state policy, it's unenforceable, right? You cannot go to court and ask the court to enforce a lease that itself violates state law. It'll never happen. You can't do it. So always keep that in mind when you have terms in a lease. That's wonderful, but the lease itself violates state law, then who cares? Okay. Yes, Bree.
The leak happened and the landlord said, and one thing was how does that work?
Right. Yeah, there's no bright line here. And I think I get your question. I don't know that the second a single water drops down, I don't think any court say, you've been constructively evicted. But the more likely course is over the course of whether 3 or 4, 6 months keeps happening, landlord promises not. At some point, the court would say reasonably this is eviction of constructive nature. But if you're the tenant, you're rolling the dice. Because if you move out too quickly, you're on the hook. But the landlord saying, look, I had a contractor come in the next week, and he shows you a schedule booking, right? So it's always a risk when you leave early. It's this game of chicken, right? Who's going to swerve out first? Yeah. Oh, you mean in Houston when the power went out? Yeah. I don't. Well, beyond constructive eviction, there are housing laws in Houston, basically every city in the country, which requires heat, right? I don't know that anyone actually sought to cancel their lease because the power company shut down. It wasn't the fault at all the landlords that the power shut down. This was of the state and the ERCOT, what the hell it is, right? So I right. Let's say that the heater in the building broke and the landlord didn't fix it. At that point, if it's freezing in the winter, I think you can claim a violation of the housing laws, and you can seek to offset your rent or to exit. Residential leases are actually very different. So this is commercial, one in our case. Residential leases are very strict laws over what condition the property must be in. So I think it's a little bit easier to get out of a lease if there are these issues. But often what happens is people want to stay in the apartments. That's where they live. That's where their families. It's not easy to always move out. They want the guy to fix the heater, and that's not always feasible. Sophia?
You enter an public place, and then part of the lease is like allowing for you to enjoy the amenities like a gym, whatever. So if they put a lock on the gym, would that be considered part of the same property that you use?
If your lease gives you access to a common area and you're denied access to that common area, there's a breach. Yeah. I mean, your leases probably say you have access to the common area at certain times of the day, and you can't bring guests. I mean, this is probably in every lease, but as long as you're complying with it, yeah, you could have that. Breach default, if you will. What else? Anything else? All right, that's all I have. So what I would ask all we do is please bring up the May 2021 exam. Take the next 40 minutes or so to at least try and do at least 2 of the questions. See if you can do 2, maybe 3. But at least try and do 2 and do the rest of them over the weekend. When you come to class on Tuesday, please have your questions ready. Right? It's a much more meaningful session if you've done it already versus just looking at it cold. Okay? So stay quiet, don't make a lot of noise, pretend this is an exam, and begin. Yeah, it's linked on the syllabus also. Thank you.